Emily woke up before sunrise as she did every day, the alarm clock ringing softly beside her small bed. The room she lived in was tiny. Just a single window, a rickety fan, and a little wooden table where she kept her mother's medicines. Her mother, lying weakly on the bed in the next room, smiled faintly when Emily whispered good morning. Emily always tried to sound cheerful, even though deep inside, she was tired and worried. The bills kept piling up, and her mother's treatment was expensive. But Emily never gave up hope. She worked as a waitress in a small diner at the edge of the city, a place where customers came and went quickly, leaving behind a few coins as tips. The manager, Mr. Collins, was a strict man who never smiled, and the other waitresses often whispered about how unfair he was. Still, Emily kept her head down and worked hard, believing that if she stayed kind and honest, good things would come her way. Every morning she tied her hair neatly, put on her faded uniform, and wore the small silver pendant around her neck. The only piece of jewelry she owned, it was shaped like a tiny heart, simple but elegant, and she loved it deeply because it reminded her of her mother's best friend, Aunt Rose, who had passed away when Emily was a child. Before she died, Aunt Rose had placed the pendant in Emily's hand and said, "One day, this will remind you that love always finds its way back." Emily never understood what she meant, but she wore it every day for comfort. The diner was always busy in the mornings. Emily would rush between tables, balancing trays of coffee and plates of pancakes, smiling at customers even when her feet ached. Most people barely noticed her. To them, she was just another waitress, but she didn't mind. She only cared about earning enough money to buy her mother's medicine. Sometimes, she skipped lunch so she could save a few extra coins. Her coworkers, Lily and Ben, often told her to take a break, but Emily only smiled and said, "I'll rest when things get better." One rainy afternoon, as thunder rumbled outside, the diner grew quiet. Emily stood by the counter, watching drops race down the window. Her thoughts drifted to her mother's condition. The doctor had warned her that without proper treatment, things could get worse. The worry in Emily's heart felt heavier than ever, but she refused to cry at work. She took a deep breath and began wiping the tables, whispering a silent prayer for strength. A few minutes later, a family entered. A father, mother, and a little boy laughing as he shook the rain from his jacket. Emily greeted them warmly, her smile lighting up her tired face. The boy giggled as she handed him a cup of hot chocolate with extra cream. And for a moment, Emily forgot her troubles. Moments like that gave her hope. Small reminders that kindness still mattered in the world. She often believed that maybe, just maybe, someone up there was watching over her. But not everyone in the diner was kind. Some customers treated her like she was invisible, snapping fingers, complaining about small things, or leaving without tipping. Once, a man had even insulted her for being too slow. Emily had apologized softly, even though she'd done nothing wrong. She never argued, she never raised her voice. Her mother had always taught her that patience could turn storms into sunshine. At night, when the diner closed, Emily would walk home under the dim streetlights, her shoes soaked, her hands cold. She often passed by expensive restaurants and bright shops where people laughed and dined. Sometimes she wondered how it would feel to live without constant worry, to have a warm home, new clothes, and peace of mind. But she quickly shook the thought away, telling herself she was lucky to still have her mother by her side. When she finally reached home, she would quietly prepare soup, feed her mother, and then sit beside her, talking softly about her day. Her mother always listened with gentle eyes and said, "You have a good heart, Emily. Never let the world change that." Those words were enough to keep her going. Late at night, when her mother had fallen asleep, Emily would sit by the window, staring at the pendant resting against her chest. Caught the moonlight, glowing faintly, she often whispered to herself, "Aunt Rose, I hope you're watching me. I'm trying my best." She didn't know that the small pendant she held so close carried a secret, one that would soon connect her life to someone powerful, someone she had never met. Fate was quietly writing a story for her, one that would begin with heartbreak but end in the most unexpected way. For now, Emily remained unaware of what the future held. All she knew was that tomorrow she would wake up early again, walk to the diner, and serve coffee with her gentle smile. Even when her body ached and her eyes were heavy with tiredness, she refused to give up. She believed that kindness was never wasted, that one day, life would reward her in ways she couldn't imagine. And as she drifted off to sleep beside her mother that night, the pendant glimmered softly, as if carrying a hidden promise that her struggles were about to change forever. Richard Hale sat alone in his enormous mansion, a place that once echoed with laughter but now felt painfully silent. The large hallways were filled with memories. Wedding photos, family portraits, and the scent of his late wife's favorite flowers that he still kept in vases. It had been 3 years since his wife, Claire, passed away in a tragic car accident. Yet to Richard, it still felt like yesterday. Every morning, he woke up expecting to hear her soft humming in the kitchen or her voice calling his name. But all that remained was silence and the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Richard was one of the richest men in the city, a successful businessman known for building an empire from nothing. People saw him as confident, powerful, and always in control. But behind that image was a broken man. Someone who had lost the only person who truly understood him. He had everything: money, fame, respect. But none of it could fill the empty space Claire had left in his heart. On his desk stood a single framed photo of Claire, smiling brightly, her eyes filled with warmth. She was wearing the pendant he had gifted her on their 5th anniversary. A delicate silver heart with a tiny blue stone in the center. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a symbol of their love, something he had designed himself so no one else in the world would ever have the same. He remembered how she used to touch it whenever she was nervous, saying it made her feel close to him. That small gesture had always made him smile. But now it only brought him pain. Every evening, Richard would pour himself a glass of wine and sit by the fireplace, staring at the pendant in the photo. He couldn't understand how fate could be so cruel. To take away someone so gentle, so full of life. He had tried everything to distract himself, traveling to different countries, donating to charities, even starting new business projects. But no matter what he did, he always came back to the same emptiness. He often whispered to himself, "If only I could see her one more time, just once." His staff respected his silence, rarely disturbing him. They said the mansion had changed ever since Claire's death. It used to be filled with music, dinner parties, and laughter. Now it felt cold, like a museum filled with memories too painful to touch. Richard had locked away most of Claire's belongings, except for her favorite chair, her books, and her pendant's photograph. He couldn't bring himself to move them, as if doing so would erase her from his world completely. Sometimes, he would visit her grave early in the morning before anyone else arrived. He brought fresh flowers and cleaned the marble stone himself, refusing to let anyone else do it. He would talk to her softly, updating her about his day, his business, and the charities she once loved supporting. "Claire," he would say, "I'm trying to make you proud, but it's hard without you." The wind would blow gently, and he always liked to believe it was her way of answering him. Despite his wealth, Richard had grown distant from people. He stopped attending business parties and rarely met friends. They all told him to move on, to find happiness again. But he simply couldn't imagine his life with anyone else. Claire wasn't just his wife. She was his anchor, the person who taught him to see life beyond money and success. Without her, everything lost meaning. One evening, as Richard sat in his study, his assistant entered with a stack of documents. "Sir," she said softly, "there's a charity dinner tomorrow at the new downtown diner. They want your presence for the opening." Richard almost refused as usual, but something inside him told him to go this time. Maybe it was boredom, maybe it was fate, but he finally nodded, saying, "All right, just this once." His assistant smiled, relieved to see him agree to leave the house. That night, before going to bed, Richard walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. He remembered how Claire used to say, "There's beauty even in chaos if you learn to see it." Her words echoed in his mind as he touched the pendant in the photo once more. He whispered, "You always knew how to find light in darkness, didn't you, Claire?" For a moment, he thought he saw her reflection in the glass. Smiling softly, just like before. He closed his eyes, feeling a wave of peace wash over him. But what he didn't know was that life was about to bring him something unexpected, something that would shake his world in a way he could never imagine. The next day, when he would walk into that diner for the charity meeting, he would come face to face with a young waitress wearing the same pendant that once belonged to his wife. It would stop him in his tracks, make his heart pound, and fill his eyes with disbelief, because in that moment, he would feel something he hadn't felt in years. A strange connection, a whisper from the past. The same pendant that had disappeared after Claire's accident would suddenly appear again, resting around the neck of a poor, kind-hearted girl named Emily, and that encounter would change both of their lives forever. For the first time in years, destiny was preparing to heal Richard's broken heart. Not through wealth or success, but through a miracle wrapped in silver and memory. It was a cold morning when Emily arrived at the diner, her hands shivering as she buttoned her uniform. The smell of coffee and pancakes filled the air, and the sound of clinking dishes echoed from the kitchen. She tied her apron carefully and took a deep breath, trying to hide her tiredness behind a bright smile. Her manager, Mr. Collins, stood behind the counter with his usual frown, holding a clipboard and barking orders at everyone. Emily nodded quietly, already used to his rude tone. She had learned to keep her head down and work hard, no matter how unfair things got. That morning felt busier than usual. Customers filled the tables, talking loudly, calling for more coffee and extra syrup. Emily moved quickly between them, balancing trays with shaky hands but steady focus. Even when someone complained or ignored her greeting, she responded politely. She couldn't afford to lose this job. It was the only way she could buy medicine for her mother. As she passed by the window, she noticed dark clouds gathering outside. Rain was coming, and she worried about how she would walk home later. Still, she told herself it was just another day, another long shift, another evening of exhaustion. But she had no idea that this would be the day her whole life would change. At one corner table sat a man in a suit, tapping his fingers impatiently. He was one of the diner owner's friends, a businessman named Mr. Grant who always acted like he owned the place. Whenever he came, everyone had to treat him with special attention. Emily, being polite as always, walked over with a smile. "Good morning, sir. What would you like to have today?" she asked softly. He looked at her without even smiling and said, "Just coffee. And make it quick." Emily nodded and hurried to the counter, her steps light but careful. In the rush of the busy morning, a little accident happened. As she carried the hot coffee toward Mr. Grant's table, someone suddenly bumped into her. The tray tilted, and before she could stop it, the cup slipped and spilled right onto his expensive shirt. The hot liquid splashed, and Mr. Grant jumped up angrily. "Are you out of your mind?" he shouted. Emily gasped. "I'm so sorry, sir. It was an accident. I didn't mean." But before she could finish, he cut her off. "You ruined my shirt. Do you even know how much this costs?" The whole diner went silent. Everyone turned to look at them. Some out of curiosity, others out of pity. Emily's hands trembled as she tried to offer napkins, but Mr. Grant pushed them away. "I don't need your excuses. This is what happens when you hire people who can't do their job," he yelled loudly. Mr. Collins rushed over, clearly nervous. "Mr. Grant, I'm so sorry for this. She's new and—" Emily interrupted quietly. "I'm not new, sir. I've worked here for 2 years." Her voice was soft but firm, and that only made Mr. Collins angrier. "Enough!" he barked. "You've caused enough trouble already, Emily." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. "Sir, please, it was an accident. I'll pay for his dry cleaning," she said, her voice shaking. But Mr. Collins didn't listen. He only looked at Mr. Grant, trying to calm him down. Then, turning back to Emily, he said coldly, "You're fired. Take off your apron and leave." The words hit her like a storm. Her knees felt weak, her throat tight. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. Lily, her coworker, stepped forward. "Mr. Collins, that's not fair. She didn't mean to." But he silenced her with a glare. Emily slowly untied her apron, her hands trembling. She looked around the diner one last time, the place that had been her second home for 2 long years. No one dared to speak, no one dared to help. With her eyes full of tears, she whispered, "I'm sorry," and walked toward the door. Outside, the rain had begun to fall heavily. The cold drops hit her face as she stepped into the street. Her uniform was damp, her shoes soaked, but she didn't care. She walked slowly, feeling the world blur around her. Her heart ached. Not just because she lost her job, but because she had tried so hard to do everything right, and still life had been unfair. When she reached the corner, she stopped under a streetlight and took a deep breath. Her reflection in a puddle looked tired and broken. She touched the small pendant around her neck, the one thing that gave her comfort. She whispered, "I don't know what to do now, Mom." The rain poured harder, and she started walking again, not knowing where she was going. But just then, she didn't realize someone had seen everything. A man who had been sitting quietly in a car parked across the street. It was Richard Hale, the billionaire who had lost his wife. He had just arrived near the diner for a business meeting but paused when he saw a young waitress running out in tears. Something about her seemed familiar, and then, as she turned her head slightly, the streetlight glinted off the silver pendant around her neck. Richard froze, his heart pounding, his breath caught. He leaned forward, staring through the rain-covered window. That pendant. It was the same one his late wife had worn every single day, the same one he thought was lost forever. He opened the car door, the rain hitting his coat. He couldn't believe what he had just seen. Was it a coincidence? Or fate bringing something back from his past? His mind raced as he watched Emily walk away slowly, clutching her pendant like it was her only treasure. Richard felt an old wound open in his heart. But this time, it came with something else, a strange feeling that maybe, just maybe, life was giving him a sign. He didn't know who the girl was, but he knew one thing for sure. He had to find out the truth behind that pendant, because somehow, in that rainy moment, he felt that the girl and his lost wife were connected by something much deeper than coincidence. The rain had stopped by evening, leaving the streets shining under the soft glow of the streetlights. Inside the diner, the air was warm again, filled with the smell of freshly baked pies and the chatter of new customers. Emily was gone, her corner by the counter empty, but no one spoke about her. For most people, it was just another day, just another waitress who came and went. But for Richard Hale, the billionaire who had seen her walk out into the rain earlier, it was not just another evening. Something about that girl, her eyes, her sadness, and most of all, that pendant around her neck, wouldn't leave his mind. He had spent the entire afternoon trying to focus on his meeting, but he couldn't. Every time he tried to read a document, the image of that pendant flashed before him, the small silver heart with a blue stone in the center. It was exactly like the one he had designed for his late wife, Claire. He could still remember that day clearly, the smile on her face when he gave it to her, and the promise she made to never take it off. When she died, the pendant was never found, and for years, Richard had believed it was lost forever. But now, he had seen it, around the neck of a young waitress who looked like she had nothing to her name but kindness. As evening turned into night, Richard couldn't ignore the feeling that fate had led him to that diner for a reason. So, the next morning he returned there, hoping to see the girl again. The place was quieter this time, a few customers sipping coffee, and the same manager, Mr. Collins, standing at the counter. Richard walked in, his presence immediately drawing attention. He was tall, dressed in an elegant suit, his expression calm but serious. The manager straightened his back nervously and greeted him. "Good morning, sir. Table for one?" Richard nodded slightly, his eyes scanning the diner, searching for her. The girl with the pendant, but she wasn't there. After a moment, Richard asked casually, There was a young waitress here yesterday. I think her name was Emily. Is she working today? Mr. Collins hesitated, surprised that someone like Richard would even remember a waitress's name. She's no longer with us, he said quickly. She caused some trouble yesterday and was let go. Richard's eyebrows furrowed. Trouble? The manager adjusted his tie nervously. An accident, sir. She spilled coffee on one of our special guests. I had no choice but to fire her. Richard stared at him silently for a few seconds, then said quietly, I see. He didn't argue, but inside, his heart ached a little. He could tell from what he'd seen that the girl wasn't careless. She had looked too gentle, too sincere, and now she was out there, alone, probably crying somewhere. When he left the diner, he stood outside for a moment, looking around. The city was alive with noise, cars honking, people rushing to work. Yet he felt strangely disconnected from it all. He wanted to find her, to ask her where she had gotten that pendant. But he didn't even know her last name. Still, something inside him whispered that their paths would cross again. He got into his car, but just as he was about to leave, he noticed something near the sidewalk. A familiar figure sitting on a bench, her head lowered. It was Emily, her uniform still damp from yesterday's rain. Her hands wrapped around a small paper bag. Richard's heart skipped a beat. He stepped out of the car and slowly walked toward her. Emily didn't notice him at first. She was lost in thought, staring at the pendant in her hands. He stopped a few steps away, his voice calm but filled with emotion. Excuse me, miss. She looked up, startled, and for a moment their eyes met. There was something kind yet powerful in his gaze, something that made her heart race. Richard pointed gently to the pendant. May I ask where you got that? Emily looked confused and held it protectively. This? It was given to me by my mother's best friend before she passed away. Her voice was soft but respectful, and Richard could see that she was being truthful. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his voice. Did she ever tell you where she got it from? Emily shook her head. No, sir. She just said it was something special. She wanted me to keep it safe. Richard stared at the pendant for a long moment, his eyes filling with memories. It was too identical to be a coincidence. Every curve, every engraving, even the small blue stone was exactly the same. His heart pounded as he whispered, That pendant belonged to my wife. Emily's eyes widened, her mouth slightly open. Your wife? She asked in disbelief. He nodded slowly, his voice trembling. Yes, she passed away 3 years ago, and that pendant disappeared after the accident. I had it made for her myself. There was only one. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Emily looked down at the pendant, her fingers shaking. I had no idea, sir. I'm so sorry. Richard smiled faintly. No, don't apologize. You didn't do anything wrong. He looked at her again, truly looking this time, and something about her presence, the innocence in her eyes, the softness in her voice, reminded him of Claire. After a long pause, he said gently, Would you come with me tomorrow? I'd like to show you something. Emily hesitated, unsure if she should trust him. He noticed her hesitation and added kindly, I promise, it's nothing to worry about. I just want to understand how that pendant reached you. There was something genuine in his tone, a deep sadness that made her heart soften. Finally, she nodded slowly. All right, sir. As Richard walked back to his car, a strange feeling washed over him. Part disbelief, part hope. For years, he had lived with emptiness. But now, seeing that pendant again felt like a piece of his wife's spirit had returned. Meanwhile, Emily watched him leave, still confused and overwhelmed. She looked down at the pendant once more, feeling that it wasn't just an ornament anymore. It was connected to something, to someone, in a way she didn't yet understand. Neither of them knew that this meeting was only the beginning. Fate had finally brought two broken hearts together, and soon, the truth behind that small silver pendant would change both of their lives forever. The next morning, Emily woke up earlier than usual, her mind full of thoughts about the man she had met the day before. She still couldn't believe it. A billionaire had stopped her in the street just to ask about her pendant. His calm voice, his gentle eyes, and the sadness behind his words had stayed with her all night. She kept replaying his words in her head. That pendant belonged to my wife. She had looked at the small silver heart again and again, wondering how it could possibly be true. It was just a simple necklace to her, something her mother's best friend had given her as a keepsake. But now, it seemed to hold a mystery much deeper than she ever imagined. Her mother, still weak but awake, noticed how lost she looked. "Emily, what's wrong, dear?" she asked softly. Emily hesitated, then sat beside her and told her everything. About the accident at work, the man she met, and what he said about the pendant. Her mother listened quietly, her expression changing slowly from concern to surprise. When Emily finished, her mother took her hand and whispered, "Maybe you should meet him, Emily. Maybe there's a reason this happened." Emily nodded, still unsure but curious. Deep down, something told her that this meeting could change everything. Later that afternoon, she made her way to the address Richard had given her. His mansion stood tall and grand at the end of a quiet street. It looked like something out of a dream, with tall gates, green gardens, and a long driveway lined with roses. She felt small and out of place as she walked up the path, clutching her pendant nervously. At the door, a kind but serious-looking housekeeper greeted her. "You must be Miss Emily. Mr. Hale is expecting you." Emily nodded politely, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, thank you." When she entered the mansion, her eyes widened. Everything was beautiful yet strangely quiet. The walls were filled with paintings, and there was a large staircase that curved upward like something from a movie. But what caught her attention most were the photographs. Dozens of framed pictures of a smiling woman with soft eyes and elegant grace. Richard's late wife, Claire. Emily stopped in front of one photo and gasped quietly. The woman in the picture was wearing the same pendant, exactly like the one hanging around Emily's neck. Her heart began to race. Richard appeared behind her, his footsteps soft but sure. "I see you found her photo," he said quietly, his eyes filled with emotion. Emily turned quickly, startled. I didn't mean to." He smiled faintly. "It's all right. She was my wife, Claire. The woman I told you about." He walked closer and pointed gently to the pendant in the photo. "You see that necklace? It's the same one you're wearing now." Emily nodded slowly, still in disbelief. Richard sighed deeply, his voice trembling slightly. "After she died, we couldn't find it. It disappeared after the accident. I thought it was gone forever." He invited her to sit down in the living room, where a warm fire burned softly in the fireplace. Emily sat carefully on the edge of the couch, feeling both nervous and curious. Richard began to tell her about Claire. How she was kind, generous, and full of life. He told her how Claire used to visit children's shelters and small clinics, helping anyone who needed it. She always said that helping others made her feel alive, he said with a sad smile. Emily listened closely, her eyes filled with emotion. The more she heard, the more she realized how deeply Richard had loved his wife, and something inside her heart felt heavy, as if she was somehow connected to this story too. When Richard paused, Emily finally asked softly, "Sir, may I tell you something? The woman who gave me this pendant, she was my mother's best friend. Her name was Rose." At the mention of that name, Richard's expression changed. "Rose?" he repeated, his eyes widening. "Claire had a friend named Rose too. They were very close years ago. She mentioned her many times in her diaries." Emily looked just as surprised. "Then maybe it's the same person, sir?" Richard stood up slowly, trying to process it all. "If that's true," he said, "then this pendant passed from Claire to Rose, and then from Rose to you." He shook his head in disbelief. "After all these years, it somehow found its way back to me." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The room was silent except for the crackling of the fire. Richard's eyes glistened with tears, not of sadness but of something softer. Peace, maybe even gratitude. He looked at Emily and said quietly, You have no idea what this means to me. Seeing that pendant again. It's like seeing a part of Claire come back to life. Emily lowered her eyes, her heart full of emotion. I'm glad I could bring it back to you, sir, even if by accident. Richard smiled kindly. No, Emily, I think this was meant to happen. Things like this don't happen by chance. He walked to the window and looked out at the setting sun, then turned back to her. You remind me of her in some ways, gentle, humble, and brave. Emily felt her cheeks warm at his words, unsure what to say. All she knew was that the pain in his eyes had softened since yesterday. It was as if something inside him had begun to heal. Before she left, Richard handed her a small envelope. Please, take this. It's not money, it's an invitation. Tomorrow, I'd like you to visit our charity foundation. I think you'll like what we do there. Emily accepted it politely. Thank you, sir. I'll come. As she walked out of the mansion, she looked back one last time. Richard stood by the window watching her leave. For the first time in years, he felt like fate had given him a reason to breathe again. And for Emily, that meeting had opened a door she never expected. A door that would soon lead her into a world of hope, healing, and a bond that would forever connect her to the woman whose pendant she had unknowingly carried close to her heart. The next morning, Emily stood in front of the big white building that Richard had invited her to visit. It was the Claire Hale Foundation, named after his late wife. And as soon as Emily saw the name written in shining silver letters above the entrance, her heart skipped a beat. She felt nervous but also excited. She had never been to a place like this before. The building looked grand yet welcoming, with wide glass doors and gardens full of blooming flowers. She took a deep breath and walked inside, holding the invitation tightly in her hand. Inside, she was greeted by a warm, friendly receptionist who smiled. You must be Emily. Mr. Hale is waiting for you in the conference room. Emily nodded shyly, following her through a bright hallway where people were busy at work. Some were sorting boxes of clothes. Others were talking to families who looked poor and tired. It didn't take her long to understand what this place was. It was a charity organization that helped struggling families, homeless children, and people who had nowhere else to go. Seeing all of this filled Emily's heart with admiration. When she entered the conference room, Richard was already there, talking to two volunteers. He turned around when he saw her and smiled warmly. Emily, I'm so glad you came. She smiled back politely, still a little shy. He gestured for her to sit. I wanted to show you what Claire built before she passed away. He began. She started this foundation to give hope to people who have lost everything, just like you were when I met you. Emily looked around the room, amazed. It's beautiful, sir, and it feels alive, she said softly. Richard nodded. That's exactly what she wanted. A place full of life and second chances. As they walked through the different sections of the building, Richard told her stories about Claire's work, how she had personally helped women find jobs, arranged shelters for single mothers, and organized education for poor children. She believed every small act of kindness could change a life, Richard said with pride. Emily listened carefully, feeling emotional. She could imagine Claire's kindness shining through every part of this place. She couldn't explain it, but she felt deeply connected to her, as if destiny had brought her here for a reason. Richard then showed her the volunteer area, where people were packing food and clothes. Would you like to help out for a bit? He asked. Emily nodded eagerly. I'd love to. Soon she found herself helping a young mother choose clothes for her little girl. The woman looked tired and sad, reminding Emily of herself not long ago. When the woman thanked her with tears in her eyes, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. She realized how good it felt to help others, to make someone smile even for a moment. Richard watched her quietly from across the room, a soft smile forming on his face. He could see something special in her. A light, a kindness that reminded him so much of Claire. When the volunteering ended for the day, he invited her to his office for tea. As they sat together, he said thoughtfully, Emily, you have a gentle heart. You remind me of Claire more than you realize. Emily blushed slightly. unsure how to respond. He continued, "I've seen many people come and go, but the way you care for others, it's genuine. You were meant to do something meaningful." Emily looked down, her fingers tracing the pendant at her neck. "I never thought I could do something important, sir," she said softly. Richard smiled kindly. "You already are. Sometimes, life puts us in painful situations just to guide us toward our true purpose." Those words stayed in her heart. For the first time in years, she didn't feel lost. She felt like she was right where she was supposed to be. A few days later, Richard called her again and offered her a position at the foundation. "You'll be working with the outreach team," he explained, "helping families in need, arranging supplies, visiting shelters. I think you'd be perfect for it." Emily's eyes widened in shock. "Are you sure, sir? I don't have experience." Richard chuckled. "Experience can be learned, Emily. But compassion, that comes from the heart, and you already have it." Tears welled up in her eyes as she whispered, "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." Weeks passed, and Emily became an important part of the foundation. She worked hard, always putting others before herself. The other staff admired her dedication, and the families she helped adored her. She would often stay late just to make sure no one went home hungry. Her laughter and kindness began to bring warmth to everyone around her, including Richard. For years, his mansion had felt empty, cold, and quiet. But ever since Emily came into his life, things had started to change. He smiled more often, he visited the foundation regularly, and he felt alive again. One evening, after a long day at work, Richard called Emily to his office. When she entered, she found him holding an old photograph. It was of Claire wearing the same pendant, smiling brightly beside him. "She would have loved you," he said quietly, his voice full of emotion. Emily blinked in surprise. "Me?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, you remind me of her. Not because of how you look, but because of your heart." He looked at her pendant and added, "Maybe she sent you to me, Emily. Maybe this was her way of making sure I didn't lose my faith in goodness." Emily felt her throat tighten, tears filling her eyes. "Maybe," she whispered softly. From that day on, their bond grew stronger. Not one of romance, but of something deeper. It was built on trust, kindness, and shared pain. Richard began to see Emily as the daughter he never had, and Emily started seeing him as the father she had always wished for. Both of them had lost something precious, but in finding each other, they discovered healing. And every time Richard saw the pendant shining around her neck, he no longer felt sorrow. He felt peace, because that small silver heart had brought two broken souls together. It had become a symbol of love, destiny, and the strange, beautiful way life weaves connections between people who are meant to find each other. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Emily had now become one of the most loved members of the Claire Hale Foundation. Everyone admired her. Not just for her kindness, but for her dedication. She always arrived early and left late, making sure every child had food, every mother had a blanket, and every old man had a place to rest. Her simple smile could lift anyone's spirit, and people often said, "When Emily is around, everything feels lighter." Richard watched all this quietly, proud and moved. He saw in Emily what he used to see in his late wife, Claire. The same warmth, the same passion for helping others. It almost felt like destiny had sent Emily into his life to continue the work Claire had started. Every time he looked at her, he didn't see a poor waitress anymore. He saw a young woman with a strong heart and a gentle soul. One evening, after a long day of distributing food in a nearby village, Emily and Richard sat together in the foundation's garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. Emily looked tired but happy, her eyes glowing in the soft light. Richard turned to her and said quietly, "You've changed this place more than you realize, Emily." She smiled shyly. "Oh, I don't think so, sir. I'm just doing what you and Mrs. Claire started." Richard shook his head gently. "No, my dear. You brought life back to this foundation, and to me. Emily looked down, feeling emotional. She didn't know what to say. Then Richard continued, his voice softer. When Claire died, I stopped believing in miracles. I thought life had nothing left to give. He paused and looked at the pendant around her neck. But the day I saw that pendant on you, something changed inside me. It was like a message, like she was telling me not to give up. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Maybe she wanted you to find hope again, sir. Maybe she sent me to remind you that love never really disappears. Her words touched his heart deeply, and he smiled through watery eyes. You sound just like her. After that day, Richard and Emily began working together even more closely. He trusted her with big responsibilities, managing new charity projects, visiting schools, and helping young women find jobs. Emily took on every task with humility and grace, never once forgetting where she came from. She often told the younger volunteers, "Don't be ashamed of your struggles. They make you strong enough to help others." Her story became an inspiration for everyone. One afternoon, while organizing an old storeroom at the foundation, Emily found a dusty box with Claire's name written on it. Curious, she opened it carefully and gasped. Inside were letters, photos, and a small diary with the initial CH on the cover. She sat on the floor and began to read. The diary was filled with Claire's thoughts, her dreams, her fears, her hopes for the foundation. And in one part, Emily's breath caught. It mentioned Rose, her mother's best friend. It said, "If anything ever happens to me, I know Rose will keep my pendant safe. I trust her with all my heart." Emily's eyes widened, realizing it was the same Rose who had given her the pendant. Her heart began to race. She whispered, "So it's true, my mother's friend really was her best friend." That evening, Emily took the diary to Richard. He looked at it silently for a long moment before gently opening it. As he read, tears rolled down his cheeks. "I haven't seen her handwriting in years," he said softly. "It's like she's speaking to me again." Emily sat quietly beside him, letting him read in peace. When he finished, he closed the diary slowly and looked at her. "She mentioned Rose," he said, his voice trembling. Emily nodded. "Yes, sir. Rose was my mother's best friend. She gave this pendant to my mom years ago, and after my mother got sick, she gave it to me." Richard took a deep breath, his hands shaking slightly. "Then it's true. Claire's pendant found its way back to me through you." He looked at Emily with a deep, emotional gaze. "Do you see, Emily? You were never just a coincidence. This was fate." The room was quiet for a moment. The only sound was the ticking of the clock. Then Richard said softly, "Claire once told me that love travels through time, that the people who are meant to meet will always find each other, no matter what." Emily felt tears slide down her cheeks. "And she was right, sir," she whispered. "Because somehow, her kindness reached me even though she was gone." After that day, something changed between them. It wasn't about wealth or charity anymore. It was about connection, a bond that tied the past and present together. Richard began to smile more genuinely, and Emily found peace in knowing that her struggles had led her exactly where she was meant to be. Together, they rebuilt the foundation into something even greater. They opened new centers, helped more people, and inspired hundreds of volunteers. And every time someone asked Richard how it all began, he would smile and say, "It started with a pendant, and a waitress with a heart of gold." One evening, as they stood in front of the new foundation branch, Richard looked at Emily and said, "Claire would be so proud of you, Emily. You've carried her light forward." Emily smiled warmly, her fingers brushing the pendant. "Maybe she's watching us right now, smiling." Richard nodded, his eyes shining. "I believe she is." In that moment, under the setting sun, Emily realized something. Sometimes, life's hardest moments are just the beginning of something beautiful. Losing her job, struggling with her mother's illness, meeting Richard. All of it had led her here, to a place where she could make a difference, to a man who found healing through her, and to a pendant that carried not just memories but destiny. And as the wind softly blew, She whispered a quiet thank you to the woman she had never met, but somehow felt connected to, because it was Claire's kindness and her pendant that had changed both of their lives forever. Months passed, and Emily's life continued to transform in ways she had never imagined. She was no longer the poor, overworked waitress who used to cry in the kitchen after being insulted by customers. Now, she was a confident, kind-hearted woman who made a difference in people's lives every single day. Every morning when she walked into the Claire Hale Foundation, people greeted her with smiles, children ran up to her with laughter, mothers hugged her, and even the elderly called her their guardian angel. But deep down, Emily always stayed humble. She never forgot where she came from, or how everything had started. With a simple pendant around her neck, Richard, too, had changed. The sadness that used to live in his eyes had faded, replaced by peace and gratitude. He often visited the foundation not as a billionaire, but as a man who cared deeply for people. He would spend hours talking to the children, sharing stories about his wife Claire, and reminding everyone that kindness never dies. Emily had become like family to him, the daughter he never had. They shared laughter, stories, and sometimes even silent moments. Moments that needed no words, only understanding. One chilly winter morning, Richard called Emily into his office. When she entered, he was sitting by the fireplace, holding an old photo album. He looked up and smiled gently. "Emily, do you know what day it is?" She shook her head, curious. He turned the album toward her. It was full of photos of him and Claire. "Today would have been our anniversary," he said softly, his voice trembling slightly. Emily sat beside him, her heart aching for him. "She was so beautiful," she said with a sad smile. Richard nodded, his eyes misty. "Yes, she was. And do you know what she loved most? Helping people." He closed the album gently and looked at Emily. "That's why I'm proud of you. You've kept her spirit alive more than I ever could." Tears filled Emily's eyes. "Sir, I'm just doing what she started. I think she guided me here." Richard reached out and gently placed his hand over hers. "I believe that too." There was silence between them for a while. A peaceful silence that spoke of shared respect, pain, and healing. Then Richard said, "Emily, I've been thinking about something. I want you to take over as director of the foundation." Emily's eyes widened in shock. "Me? But sir, I'm not ready for that." He chuckled softly. "You are, my dear. You've proven yourself through your actions, not your words." Emily felt her heart race, tears brimming in her eyes. "Sir, I don't know what to say." Richard smiled warmly. "Say yes, because this was meant to be." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the pendant resting against her chest. She thought about her journey. From the tiny cafe where she worked endless shifts, to the night she was fired unfairly, to the moment a stranger stopped her on the street and changed her life forever. Every tear, every struggle, every prayer she had whispered for her mother. It had all led her here. She realized that the pendant had not just been an old piece of jewelry. It had been a bridge, connecting two souls, two destinies, and two lives that were meant to heal each other. The next day, the foundation organized a big charity event in Claire's honor. People from all walks of life came. Rich, poor, families, children, and even media reporters. The hall was decorated beautifully, with flowers, candles, and pictures of Claire smiling warmly. Richard stood on stage, looking proud but emotional. When it was time for his speech, he called Emily to join him. As she stepped up, the crowd clapped loudly. Richard looked at everyone and said, "Years ago, when I lost my wife, I thought I'd lost all purpose. But life has a strange way of sending us miracles, sometimes in the form of people." He turned to Emily with a smile. "This young woman reminded me that love never truly dies. It only changes form." He then announced, "Today, I'm officially naming Emily as the new director of the Claire Hale Foundation, the heart that keeps it beating." The crowd erupted in applause, and Emily's eyes filled with tears. She took the microphone, her voice trembling. "Thank you, Mr. Hale, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself," she began softly. "I was just a simple waitress trying to survive. But one small act of kindness changed everything." She touched her pendant gently. "This belonged to a woman I never met, but who changed my life forever. I carry it not as jewelry, but as a reminder that love and goodness can travel through time and find you when you least expect it." Her words touched everyone's hearts, and many people in the audience wiped their tears. After the event, as the guests left and the lights dimmed, Richard and Emily stood together on the balcony, watching the city lights. The night air was cool, and the stars shone brightly above them. Richard smiled and said quietly, "Claire would be proud tonight." Emily looked up at the sky and whispered, "I hope she knows that we did all this for her." Richard nodded. "She knows, Emily. She's been with us all along." Suddenly, a soft breeze blew across the balcony, and the pendant around Emily's neck glimmered in the moonlight. She placed her hand over it and smiled through tears. It felt almost as if Claire herself was saying thank you. Emily closed her eyes, feeling a sense of peace wash over her heart. For the first time in years, everything made sense. The pain, the struggle, the loss. It had all been part of a bigger plan. From that day on, Emily led the foundation with strength and compassion. She helped more people than she could ever count, and every life she touched became a new story of hope. Richard, proud and at peace, often said, "Meeting her was my second miracle." And Emily, whenever she looked at the pendant, whispered a prayer of gratitude. Not just for the woman who once wore it, but for the fate that brought them all together. Years later, when people spoke of the Claire Hale Foundation, they didn't just remember the billionaire or his late wife. They remembered the young waitress who rose from hardship, carried a pendant of love, and turned it into a legacy of kindness. And somewhere beyond the stars, Claire Hale must have been smiling, because her love, through that pendant, through Emily, through every act of goodness, had never really left the world. It had only found a new way to shine.